MMA Picks, if you know anything about us, you know that if we were able to have any matchmaking abilities, we would have put together fights like Mateusz Gamrot and Arman Tsarukyan like you had in last week's main event. But if you let Joe Rogan make fights, he'd probably go with Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller too, or Robbie Lawler and Bryan Barberena, and that's exactly what we have this weekend. So I hope that Anik and whoever else is in the booth just gives Joe the mic and he gets to commentate for this one. Because if you look at it, for Robbie Lawler, 14-9 just in the UFC, former champion, he wins the belt against Johnny Hendricks, UFC 181, best poster ever, and that was a great fight. And then he goes out there, he beats Rory McDonald, hangs on to the belt, beats Carlos Condit in a fight of the night, holds on to the belt.
Fight of the year.
Then he gets knocked out in the first round against Tyron Woodley, and he hasn't looked the same since. Now, has he won fights since? Yes, he has. And I mean, his last fight against Nick Diaz was a really good win. And if you're like me, and you think about that fight in your mind's eye, you go, well, Nick Diaz looked bad. And I've got something to tell you. I went back and rewatched that twice today. Nick Diaz looked bad in the first 30 seconds. He looked bad in the last 30 seconds where he drops down to a knee, then to his butt, then he grabs his knee, and then Jason Herzog goes, can you continue? And he goes, nope.
Well, he broke his nose and quit.
Yeah, I looked at that one and I thought, okay, end of it's bad, start of it's bad, but the rest of it's pretty damn good. Nick Diaz put together great boxing combinations. He was ripping to the body. He was throwing his lead left as a jab, but he was also throwing it as a hook, and he had a lot of accuracy on it. He also threw a lot of volume, but in that fight, it was a lot of fun while it lasted between those two guys. But for Robbie Lawler, there's a lot of crazy things I can talk about. I could say, hey, he's got a tramp stamp that looks like in a foreign language that somebody wrote, I make questionable decisions. But other than that, Matt, Robbie Lawler, when he's not fighting like a really good wrestler, a guy that's knocking him out, he has some pretty good success, right?
We ask ourselves this a lot on this channel. Like, what are these fighters willing to go through to win? I don't have to ask that when Robbie Lawler's fighting.
Or Bryan Barberena.
No. Like, Robbie Lawler, I have seen win fights off, like, he's on death's doorstep. He's taken so much damage. Like, yeah, Bryan Barberena's got hurt and come back and look good. Robbie Lawler split his lip from his lip to his nose and still knocked a guy out. Like, there's no quit in Robbie Lawler at all. I don't care what happens in an MMA fight. If the first 2 rounds he gets 10-8'd in, he's still going to try with everything he has in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I have to go back to the Colby Covington fight, which stylistically was terrible for him, but what was his best round in that fight? 5th round, he was pushing Covington back. He had defended a few takedowns. He still lost that fight in a very one-sided fight, but still, Lawler, he behaved in the way that you want a champion to behave in. He got better as the fight went on. I think that's a really important thing. If against Nick Diaz, and you're right, Diaz looked okay on some of the in-betweens, but the problem was he didn't put anything behind any of his shots. You can throw your arms out like this all day long. If you're not putting any power behind your shots, your arms aren't going to get as tired as a result, and it's going to make your volume even easier to throw. Lawler, once he was able to realize, okay, there's no real repercussion for standing in the pocket. Like, I can land my own power shots too. You could see the confidence in Robbie Lawler start to build as that fight continued. Now, the difference is, the second he hit Nick Diaz with one really clean shot, Nick Diaz was looking for a way out. He was like, damn, it's been years since I've done this and I've made a lot of money in my life. Bryan Barberena is a little bit different, though, and he's at a very different stage of his career, and that's why I think this fight's going to be so fun, because I think Lawler's still going to fight in that very same manner, but I think Barberena is willing to take a lot more punishment and try to dish his own out. And the interesting thing about this fight is that we've seen multiple versions of both guys. The difference is, with Lawler, it's kind of the trajectory you see out of a lot of athletes. They get better, they reach the pinnacle, and then they start to get worse as they get older and they start their decline. Lawler, yes, he was able to kind of halt that with his last performance, but still, the last 4 top-tier fighters he's fought, he has been on the losing side of those fights. But with Barberena, post-stomach surgery and post some of his own injuries, he hasn't necessarily been the same guy that he was all the way back when he fought Vicente Luque and even Randy Brown. He does seem to be slightly more hesitant on the outside. He even uses his own offensive wrestling a little bit more in his fights. So I'll be curious to see what version of Barberena we get, because you know he's probably thinking, okay, I'm fighting an older guy who's 40. If Barberena comes into this fight looking to throw bombs in the feet with Robbie Lawler, we're in for an absolute treat of a fight.
Yeah, he just did that in March against Matt Brown, had a fight of the night against the hometown guy, because that was an Ohio fight night, and Matt Brown was a big-time, fan favorite, and obviously, you could argue either way about the decision, but the biggest part about it was Barberena was cracking on the feet like it was 2016, and his takedown defense was like it was in 2022, because that's the thing, like, I go through Bryan Barberena's fights, and I'm excited about this one. 14-9 in just the UFC, that's not Elite XC, that's not Strikeforce for Robbie Lawler, Zuffa banner, 14-9. Bryan Barberena, 8-6, and I look at the losses, an early Chadler Prees loss, All right, it is what it is. You lose to Colby Covington, Leon Edwards, Vicente Luque, Randy Brown. All right, top 15 or periphery of the top 15. Bryan Barberena's last loss to Jason Witt. Jason Witt gets knocked out on the feet, but if he doesn't get knocked out on the feet, he's taking you down and he's going to deep waters. And for Mr. Barberena, if you look at his last 4 fights, he's 3-1. That's very good. Anthony Ivy, 5 of 24 on takedown attempts, but the takedowns were a big story for Ivy when it was on the feet. Barberena. Jason Witt went 8 of 18. Then you have Darian Weeks, 4 of 8 in a fight that was close. And then the last time out, if you look at it against, Matt Brown. Matt Brown went 5 of 7 on his takedown attempts. So again, 5, 8, 4, and 5. Those aren't good totals to be taken down. And Barberena, once he gets to the mat, he works his damnedest to get back up, but he gets taken down to the mat a fair bit in his fights. Now again, beats Ivy by decision. Good fight against Darian Weeks. Split decision fight of the night against Matt Brown. If you look at it career-wise, 4 fight of the nights for Bryan Barberena, and he's had 2 since that kind of career possibly ending
Robbie
injury.
Lawler's like fight of the night, fight of the years over here.
Robbie Lawler is a fight of the year type of guy. But again, only 55% takedown defense for Bryan Barberena career, so it's not that great. But you look at this fight, I mean, Matt, stylistically, skill for skill when they strike, this should be a fun one. And oh, by the way, Robbie Lawler, like Mike Gundy, I'm a man, I'm 40.
And that's the big story of this fight. Lawler isn't the guy he used to be. Like, if this is 2015 Robbie Lawler, the fight's over in 45 seconds. Like, I'm not even joking how fast this fight
going
would
to
be.
the moon.
Yeah, like, Robbie Lawler's one of the all-time great welterweights. He really is. And he was an interesting champion, too, because he was such a fun fighter to watch while he held the belt. Normally, you get the belt and you think, okay, how do I hold on to this? I make a lot more money outside the UFC. I want to maintain my championship for as long as possible. Robbie Lawler turned his aggression up to 11, and shit got wild, and that's why I appreciate it. I think he's going to fight in the same manner that he always has. I don't expect him to go for takedowns, even though Lawler used to wrestle a lot more early on in his career than he does now, ever since his second run in the UFC.
Because he was still living and training in Iowa with Pat Miletich.
And ever since his second run in the UFC, the Koscheck win, there's a lot of wins, his second time over, he hasn't been as much of a wrestler. He's a decent defensive wrestler against people who don't specialize in it, like the Covingtons or even the Usmans of the world would, but against a regular wrestler, he can defend a lot of those attempts. I expect this fight to primarily be contested on the feet, but I do think Barberena is starting to look like the fighter he used to be a little bit more. And even the Matt Brown fight, I know it was a split decision. I thought Barberena was able to win that fight.
Yep.
And I think Barberena, if he's able to use some of the same techniques that he employed in that Matt Brown fight, use some kicks, keep this fight at a longer range, I think he'd have a lot of success against Robbie Lawler. But even at 40 years of age, I think Lawler's going to make this a very fun fight and one that you're not going to want to miss.
This should be a fun one. You look at the odds for this fight, and Lawler open a plus 130. He's now minus 125 underdog for Barberena. Open the favorite minus 130. Plus 105, 103, somewhere around there. We have a look at the Topology votes. Surprise that's there to you. I would think former champ gets the respect with the fans. I'm going to say over under 70% Lawler.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. It is under, and they're actually really close. So 868 total votes, 54% Lawler, 72% by decision, 22% by knockout for the 46% that have Barberena, 77% by decision, and 16% by knockout. So again, the odds have shifted. You do now have Robbie Lawler as the favorite. The fans also have Lawler. Do you have Lawler?
I don't. And this is why. I remember an interview that he did after the Nick Diaz fight, and it was very telling to me. He said, hey, the reason I looked good in that Diaz fight was that's a fight I could get up for. Like, you signed the contract to fight Nick Diaz. You're excited for that. That's
and
a legacy fight.
185 too on short notice.
But no, they thought, no, it wasn't. That fight was signed for 170 and switched to 185 the week of the fight because Nick Diaz didn't want to cut the weight.
That's what I meant.
But no, Robbie Lawler showed up thinking he was going to fight at 170.
So they ended up at 185 on short notice. Here nor there, but I understand what you mean as well.
My whole thing for Robbie Lawler was that he was fighting an opponent that he could get excited for because both guys are kind of the future Hall of Famer talk. You know what I mean? Like, Nick Diaz, one of the most famous fighters of all time. Same thing with Robbie Lawler. Those are fights that when you're 40 years old, they'll make you train like you did when you were 32 years old. I don't think Robbie Lawler signed the contract against Bryan Barberena and probably felt that same enthusiasm to go back into a training camp. At 40 years of age, again, I think Lawler is that champion. Like, this is going to sound so cheesy, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like, when you're a champion, if I saw Robbie Lawler and we became friends, I would call him champ. No matter what. Like
Shannon Briggs.
But when you are a champion no matter what. Because it's so hard to get to that point to begin with. For Robbie Lawler, he went through hell to become a UFC fighter, and even his second run after he lost the belt has been very difficult, but he's never taken an easy fight even during this stretch. He fought Neil Magny, who was really good at the time, Colby Covington, RDA in a main event. Like, he's never taken an easy fight until now, which is wild to say that, like, when you're as good as Robbie Lawler, Bryan Barberena is an easy fight. I think this is going to be one of those fight of the night contenders, but I do favor Barberena.
Barberena cracks. He's got great long-range weapons, understands distance, also takes a lot of damage. But when I do look at this, you look at that Lawler fight, rematch against Diaz. The first time they fought was UFC 47. When they still named them, the name of it, Big John would get behind it. It's on. It's on. And he got flatlined by a hook and knocked out, and Nick Diaz won that one. He looked great in his last fight. But again, for Lawler's last time out, he had volume. He had a good right hand. He could mix it up and throw uppercuts from both sides. But the craziest part for Lawler is when he goes to throw his power shots, and even when he's thinking about striking and closing the distance, because he was closing the distance against Nick Diaz. He pressed the pace the whole fight. Low left hand, got hit a lot on that side. So can Barberena figure that out, land his own shots. Robbie Lawler will kick. He had a great body kick against Nick Diaz.
One of the all-time great head kick knockouts in this division.
But again, that body kick against Diaz was a big one, and I love the kicks out of Lawler. For that reason, I like him against Barberena. I like the volume. I like the power. I like the fact that, listen, these wrestlers have been able to figure him out. Magny was able to stall him out. Covington was as well. Again, so was RDA in the coldest main event you could have in Winnipeg, Canada. But for me, I do like the former champ in Robbie Lawler. We're split on the pick. This is an amazing fight. Joe Rogan's going to be so excited about it, and you should be too. Can't wait for it, and some big fights to come. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.